And on that note, I want to welcome everybody to the world according to that man, Benjamin Jeremy Stein. And I want to welcome everybody to the Saturday night special, Ben Stein's Rabbit Hole. And it's
That's a new one on me, Jude. I hadn't even heard that myself.
and you'll understand why very soon, sir. But we are joined tonight by he's not a simple man, but he lives a simple life now.com founder Gary Collins, a man that served this country for over 20 years and part of the Rush Army, member 2026.
Wait a minute, the Rush Army?
The band Rush.
Oh. Okay.
Gary, you look great. How are you, sir?
Good.
Where are you, Gary, if we may ask?
I'm back in Arizona.
He's back in.
Oh, he's back in Arizona.
He's back in Arizona.
God bless you, sir.
And of course, this show wouldn't be complete without actor, writer, provocateur, saint, sinner, lover, father, grandfather, America's humble servant, but of course, lawyer, mathematician, statistician, and masticism, and of course, Dr. Benjamin Jeremy Stein. Welcome back, sir. We salute you.
Honor to be here, sir.
Okay.
Oh, wait a second. Okay, great.
So Ben called me today. We speak constantly. I just want everybody to know, after a show, Ben and I love each other no matter what. We've had that love affair for many years, no matter what we say sometimes on the show. And we hug in forgiveness, and we have that good discourse that people should have. But Ben spoke to me today, and he said he wanted to speak about a certain topic. So here's the intro.
With respect, I said a very big topic.
A very big topic. But here's the thing, I want to lead into it a little bit, Ben. And the reason I wanted to call it a rabbit hole, because once we start having a conversation, the rabbit hole infers, Ben, when people start searching on Wikipedia or YouTube, it takes them from one video to the next, and the same thing with Wikipedia, it takes you to the next thing, and that's what a conversation with you is like. And you get history.
Not infers, but that's okay.
Sorry?
I said, you mean implies, not infers, but that's okay. I think your high school English teacher would be very
Mrs.
happy.
Levin would be very disappointed.
Is she still living, by the way?
I don't know. I told you,
Let's
her
son-in-law.
Her son-in-law was like patient zero, and thank God he recovered. 3 months in a coma, and he came out and he said, what's going on? Is everybody okay?
What do you mean patient zero in what?
From COVID. He was one of the first cases in New York City.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay. So on that note, I want to get quickly, Ben. I was reading a really story today, Gary and Ben, about Washington has still yet to name their football team. So I thought, what a great name.
I did not know that. I'm from Washington.
Yes,
and from Washington
because it was the Redskins
from time immemorial,
and now they're nameless. They're just Washington last year, and I thought, what a great name would be the Swamp.
That's very funny,
and it would be really virtue signaling by Daniel Snyder to screw everybody. I mean, he's gotten into so much trouble with the NFL, but then, Ben, it got me into my rabbit hole of thinking when the Washington Bullets, right? They changed their name to the Washington Wizards, and
right.
And I started thinking to myself, maybe Robert Byrd named that team. He was a Grand Wizard in the KKK, a Democrat, and I'm surprised that they've allowed that. But Ben, getting to the Democrats and the KKK and racism, tee us off, Ben, with what you want to talk about.
Well, what I said was, look at the history of this incredibly great country. Incredibly, unbelievably great country. The best country there has ever been. Absolute miracle of man's and God's creation. And two big things happened in the history of the United States. By far the biggest was the liberation of the Negro, as he used to be called, now we say the African person, from slavery to full citizenship status in the United States of America. That was done in the 1860s and 1870s by the Republican Party. They were being fought against tooth and nail by the Democrat Party. The Democrat Party were the party of secession and of denying African Americans civil rights. That was absolutely predictable, ran like clockwork, Republicans, party of the black man and freedom and decency for the black man. Democrats, repression of the black man. Somehow, it's now 2021. Republicans are branded as the party of racists and the party of people who are keeping black people down. How this happened is a complicated, as Judah would say, rabbit hole of a story. And the Republicans themselves are not blameless in creating this confusion. But the sad truth is that in this one gigantic triumph of the United States of America, the liberation of the black man and woman, of course, the Republican Party was noble, incredibly noble, a historic epiphany of nobility. And yet somehow that's all been turned on its head, and the Republicans are made to seem to be the party of racism. It's a really unfortunate thing. The second thing that Judah and I were talking about, and I will not monopolize the mic the whole time, Gary. Of course, we want to hear every word you have to say. But the second thing is that some would say, yeah, but the Democrat Party's big accomplishment was getting us out of the Great Depression and getting an economic safety net under the ordinary American. The problem with that is, first of all, the Republicans created almost every major program under the New Deal under Franklin Delano Roosevelt. They were started in the last year of the term of Herbert Hoover. Herbert Hoover, almost everything you can think of was first proposed by Herbert Hoover. The Democrats followed through, no doubt about it. That did not solve the Great Depression. It was rearming for the Second World War that solved the Great Depression. So what the great achievement of the Democrat Party has been, I am not clear of. We know that the Republican Party did something incredibly great. They liberated the black man. Why has history gotten so confused about this?
It's a great question.
Now I beg your pardon, and I turn the floor over to my colleague.
No, it's a great question you're raising, and we have to go to the next rabbit hole. I was hoping to save that Herbert Hoover thing, and we can. But Gary, he brings up a great point about race, right? So just for the very basics, Gary, a lot of people don't know Boston was the beacon of liberalness. Was the last city, or it was the last city to have to allow blacks on their baseball team. They were the last integrated MLB baseball team. The Celtics in the 1980s used to have half white players as half blacks. Yet this common theme that's been perpetrated, Gary. It's been going on for ages. How do we stop it?
I don't know. It's very.
That's the smartest answer I've ever heard on a panel show. That's really good.
Yeah, it's the Democrats have been very smart in the sense of they knew what to infiltrate and infiltrated the institutions. They knew if they could get into the teachers union, heavily dominated by the left. I had a girlfriend who was actually her and her family were registered Republicans, and she was a teacher in Southern California, and she got pushback all the time. And this was quite a while ago. And I think what they've done is they're smart. They go, if we run the educational institutions and we're the intellectuals, they rewrite history. They're smart. They just rewrite it. And it's like, what are you talking about? You're the racist. Whoa. Hold on a second here. Last time I checked, my part, and I don't belong to a party, but I do lean right. That's obvious. I'm a former military law enforcement. I admit that. But I think that we have to start educating people and expressing ourselves and drawing our line in the sand. Most of the time, people cower because they're afraid, right? It's that kind of trick question, when did you stop being a racist? And you're like, I'm not, you know what I mean? You're all deer in the headlights. And that's what it is. It's a lot of trickery, and I don't know how to solve it. It's asinine to me because by breathing, I'm a racist today.
Well,
but Ben, I want to get to something with you quickly. So we've spoken about history, the way they've treated Nixon on the sense of what he did. Obviously, nobody's reading about his saving Israel. But one of the most important things about Nixon that you don't read is the fact that when he was out, segregation was nil, right? 99% gone in the South.
When Mr. Nixon took office in '69, there were still a very large number of Southern school districts that were segregated by law. That is to say, they were not segregated by the fact of where people lived in various neighborhoods, but the school districts themselves mandated racial segregation. That was in January 20th of '69. By the time Mr. Nixon left office, very cruelly because of the fake crimes of Watergate, which never really happened, uh, the school district was something on the order of 99% integrated. He never gets any credit for that. Never gets any credit at all. Mr. Nixon created the first federally controlled program requiring that contractors working on federal government projects have a certain quota of African American or other non-white workers and contractors and suppliers. The Republicans never got any credit for that, and that was fought against tooth and nail by the Democrats. The Republicans were the ones who proposed fair housing in the Congress, such that a person could not say, I will not sell my house to a black person or to a Hispanic or to an Asian or to a Jew. The Republicans were the ones who pushed that forward. They were fought against tooth and nail by the Democrats. No one ever gives Republicans credit for that. And it is a very great shame that
It's
the
very
Republicans
disheartening.
don't claim credit for it in some way.
So Gary, my question to you, I want to ask you a question, Gary. Did you learn this when you were in school? I mean, obviously you know.
How old are you, Gary? You're young. How old are you, Gary?
I'm in my early 50s.
So you're young compared to me. You're young.
He's
Yeah,
on the
yeah,
good
but I
side
mean-
of he's on the good side of 50.
Yeah, so far. In school, it was different. See, I grew up in a very poor small town, and half of it was Indian reservation, half of it was basically white trash, me. So, you know, we grew up differently in the sense that I don't even remember us really talking about racism or any of this. We were just taught history.
No, but did
that's
you
it.
learn that
You know,
Nixon?
it was the facts were the facts.
What did you get that? What
No,
Ben
we
was
did
speaking?
not. And if we did, I would not remember that, to be honest with you. I'm too
So,
big mold to
so Ben, my
remember what
question
they
to
taught me
you
in high
then
school.
goes, how are the Republicans so negligent? And we've discussed this before. How were they so negligent in allowing the left to take over our universities, our school systems from the ground? How did they let unions become so powerful? I mean, honestly, I don't know, Ben. You probably know when this started and how it started.
Well, the left wing of the American political spectrum has always been extremely industrious, capable, hardworking, patient. They were very, very weak in the 20s. They became quite strong in the 30s because people were looking for someone to blame for the Great Depression, and they were looking for some hero to come along and to praise for saving us. They fixed on Republicans as being the cause of the Great Depression, which was not true at all, and they fixed on the FDR Democrats as being the saviors, which was not true at all. The Great Depression was not ended by anything FDR did, although, to be sure, some of the things that the New Deal did were very, very good, admirable things, but they had been proposed by the Republicans under Herbert Hoover before the Democrats enacted them. The main one was still called federal deposit insurance, which makes sure that people cannot lose their money if their banks fail, and banks, in fact, cannot fail. So that was a gigantic thing, and the nationwide adoption of unemployment insurance, so that when people lose their jobs, they get at least a modest stipend to keep their house and home together. That was Republican innovation proposed under Hoover, but the Democrats made it go through, and they probably raised the amounts that were being paid too. But there's a wonderful book on this subject, if I may immodestly say so. My father, the late Herbert Stein, and if I may say immodestly say, a quite famous historian and economist, wrote about this in very great detail. I would even say in too much detail, and
It was that big of a book.
It was a very, very fact-filled book, and but the Democrats just worked their way in, worked their way in, worked their way in. I give you, if I may, a small example. I, your humble servant, was a teacher at University of California in Santa Cruz, the most beautiful campus you'd ever want to see in your life. Just an incredibly beautiful campus, and filled at the time I was there with some very, very nice people, but also with a kind of hardcore cadre of communists. And I don't mean small C communists, I mean big C communists. They attracted more and more students to the idea that they're doing something brave and revolutionary and heroic and likely to get them to have sex. And they clustered together. One of their leaders, maybe their main leader, was a woman named Angela Davis, who was a black woman communist, and she just attracted a lot of people who I guess wanted to rebel against their parents, and they just kept growing and growing and growing. I know that at some point there was a reaction against that, because I, your humble servant, at some point in the 80s, was invited to give the graduation speech at UC Santa Cruz, and they knew very well that I was a Republican, but at the last minute I was canceled. I was blackballed. So, and from then on, as far as I know, the complete sweep of all conservatives at UC Santa Cruz has just been ongoing
and pretty much all over across most
across a great many universities.
A great many. I don't want to give the exact stat, but it's a whopping number. On that note, if you just tuned in, you are listening to the Saturday Night Special, Ben Stein's Rabbit Hole. I want to remind everybody to please keep downloading our episodes on wherever you could get the podcast, wherever it streams. It streams in a lot of places, so please. Chatbox, Google Cast, all these different places, Podbean, of course, Apple, and give us that nice review. I want to thank everybody that's been listening. And of course, benstein.substack.com. But you could also find Gary's podcast. It's really a lot of fun, simplelifenow.com. Download Gary's podcast. It's very interesting. I've been on it. I'll probably be on it again. And hopefully.
That guy Ben. That guy Ben's been on there too.
And Ben Stein's been on it. So please download the podcast. It's a lot of fun. And welcome back to the Saturday Night Special of Ben Stein's Rabbit Hole. I love saying it. But I want to explain to people really what it's, because Ben Stein is the legit Wikipedia, because Wikipedia is slanted. When you get your history from Ben Stein, you get it factually correct. You might like it, you might dislike it, but it's history as history is. And
that's very kind of you. Thank you very much.
And it's the truth. You've always been fair and balanced when it comes to stuff. So as the rabbit hole, Gary, continued today, then it went to what else have Republicans got the shitter for? And I brought up Nixon again, but this in regards to Kennedy, because Kennedy, had he not been assassinated, he would have. I mean, he obviously the media would have covered for him a lot. But he would have been more known as the Vietnam. He got us into Vietnam and the Cuban Missile Crisis. So,
right. Well, the Cuban Missile Crisis, that was wow. It was a thorough disaster from day one. Started when right after he was inaugurated, President Kennedy had a meeting with Nikita Khrushchev, who was the head of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, in Vienna, and Khrushchev took the measure of Mr. Kennedy and decided he was weak. He was a rich kid, a playboy, and not a serious national or international leader. And after that, Mr. Khrushchev decided he could put nuclear-tipped missiles in Cuba and be a very, very, very dangerous threat to the United States. And this was in response, to be fair, to the U.S. putting nuclear-armed missiles in Turkey, very close to the border of the Soviet Union, which the Soviet Union did not like at all. So, and then Kennedy, in order to show that he was a tough guy and a sharker, as we Jews say, he warned the Russians no more missiles, and he set up the naval blockade around Cuba. And that was a very scary time and could have led to international global nuclear war, something very close to the end of the world. And if not the end of the world. And luckily, cooler heads prevailed in both Russia and in the United States, and there was no nuclear war. But Kennedy's leading up, and Kennedy really did lead up to it, unfortunately, by showing weakness to Khrushchev in Vienna.
And plus getting us into Vietnam.
Well, that was another thing. See, Eisenhower got us into Vietnam in a very small way, because when the French were defeated at Dien Bien Phu, which is a very, very famous battle in Vietnamese history, the communists really were all set to take over all of Vietnam. And Eisenhower said, we will back an anti-communist South Vietnam, but we want the South Vietnamese to stand up and fight along with us. And they did that to some extent. There were some South Vietnamese who were very, very brave and imaginative, courageous fighters. Very, very impressive people. But then it was clear they were not going to be able to beat the communists. So Kennedy started putting in more and more and more advisors who were really fighting. And pretty soon we got to be quite a large number. And then when Mr. Kennedy was very tragic and unfortunately murdered, the Johnson just said, apparently at a meeting of the cabinet or else of the Security Council, took out his penis and said, there's no Vietnamese who's got a schlong like this. And he said, and we're not going to let them push us around. And he sent a great many more American soldiers in there. And by the time President Nixon was inaugurated in '69, there were several 100,000 American soldiers there. And by that time, we were really stuck there in a big way.
So thank you for that lesson, Gary. I mean, most people don't know this. I mean, this is the sort of history. I mean, that is frighteningly left out. I mean, when they blame it's. And it goes to what I've been saying, and I spoke to Ben about this. No matter what Trump did, it was in the bag. It didn't matter. And history and in these subjects, Gary, it's in the bag. It doesn't matter what Republicans do or conservatives do to lead, to fight, to battle.
Now, if you have it all depends on who's doing the counting. I have an extremely smart friend named Arthur Best, who was my college roommate and a really, really, really smart guy, not by any means a conservative, but just a terribly smart guy, who was Deputy Consumer Affairs Commissioner of the city of New York, or maybe it was Manhattan, I don't know, some big entity in New York. And he was negotiating with the Teamsters Union, a well-known, I think I can fairly say gangster infiltrated organization, about the price per cubic foot that the city of New York would pay the Teamsters for hauling away the trash. And at a certain point, my friend said to the Teamsters representative, look, you guys are going to be counting how many boxes there are. What do you care what the price is? You'll make it work out however you want to make it work out. And that's sort of how it worked out in the 2020 election.
Gary, go ahead. That was a great way of saying it without getting banned, but Gary, go ahead.
Well, Ben, I got a question for you. When did the infiltration start? Because we know during the 60s and 70s that the Russians had numerous cells in the U.S. and sleeper cells that were infiltrating and pushing the socialist agenda. How did it infiltrate itself to the point where we're at today? Because we have people in our U.S. government right now who have said flat out, I am a socialist. They're in our government. How is that even possible?
Well, it's not
that
illegal.
blows me away.
It's not illegal to be a socialist. It's not. It used to be illegal to be a communist. It's not illegal to be a communist.
Or
anymore.
Communist. Socialist, communist, Ben.
Oh, no, there's a big
no, I
difference.
know, but so to Gary's point, I think he meant more of communism.
Why are there so many extreme leftists and even people who support communist countries that are well known to commit mass murder? And that is I have said on this wonderful show of ours many times, this is a question of mental illness more than a question of politics. There has to be some component of mental illness to support a government system that involves the murder of its own citizens in order to make the society continue to run, and for that matter, not to run at a very high level of prosperity. So, it's kind of fascinating. This is another little historical fact that not many people know. World War II was a terrible, horrible, terrible thing. Probably the worst, in many ways, the worst thing that's ever happened to the world. And during World War II, the big battle, by far the biggest battle, was between Germany and the Soviet Union. Way bigger than the war between Germany and Britain or the war between Japan and the United States. Way, way bigger. More, more Russians, Soviet Union citizens, were killed by Stalin and by the Communist Party than by the Germans. People don't know that. Stalin was killing his own people like mad in order to whip the whole country into shape to fight the Germans to the death. And in fact, I'm just last night was watching a documentary on this, in which a man who had been a prisoner in one of Stalin's prison colonies said, if you've been a prisoner in one of Stalin's prison colonies, fighting on the front lines against the Nazis doesn't seem that bad. So,
Well, think about it.
yet young Americans march around with hammers and sickles and saying, I'm a communist on them.
Well, you notice, Ben, they're very smart, especially in the intellectual and academic circles, is they use socialist instead of communist. They do
Yes.
it on purpose. See, I agree with you. There's a mental illness to it, but these aren't dumb people because they play a lot of word games and a lot of psychological warfare to trick people. You
Yes,
know, they
without
change the
question.
terminology all the time, so you don't quite understand what they're saying. Like they're saying progressive. That's just
Exactly.
communist at a different name, and they play this name game all the time. So I
And
would
it's
say, yeah, there's mental illness, but they're very smart, and that's what I'm trying to figure out is when did this tide turn in the freest country in the known world that we know of anyway, and these people come in, and Mao, Hitler, and Stalin are the three biggest mass murders in recent history. And Mao, remember when all these kids were wearing Mao hats? What
I
the?
absolutely, I was one of them. I was one. I was at Yale and I was doing it.
So
Oh,
he's
man.
asking, how did that happen and
It
when did that
became
happen?
because little by little, there's a process known as co-optation, in which a group of people gets in, they put themselves on the faculty hiring committee, and then they decide who gets hired. And if someone, excuse me, named Ben Stein comes up, and they say, Ben Stein, his father's a big Republican, his mother's his mother, even as a young woman, was a famous anti-communist. He's out. On the other hand, if somebody named Joe Schmeckel comes in and they know he was working very hard for the garbage men's union and they say, he seems like our kind of guy, he's in. And then they get to be more and more of them. And little by little, you simply can't get in without being part of the ruling clique. And this is really, really true in Hollywood. In Hollywood, the co-optation process, in which you have to be part of the leftist elite clique in order to get hired, is really ironclad. I came here to Hollywood in '76, and even then, even though I was known to have been recently an employee of Richard Nixon and had up until then been a columnist at the Wall Street Journal, a very conservative editorial page at that time, I got jobs. I got lots of jobs. I got really a lot of jobs. And that's all changed now. You cannot get hired as a screenwriter nowadays, or very, very, very rarely, unless you are an extreme left winger, or black, or lesbian, and preferably all of them.
Or
Yes,
a
you hit
pedophile.
you hit the intersectionality
Yes.
hierarchy at that level.
You hit the
Because-
jackpot.
One thing I
And-
want to say, one thing that amazes me
please.
about Hollywood is the amount of known pedophiles. And that is something that I find absolutely sickening to me. It is well known that Hollywood is infiltrated with them and has been for a long time, and they just turn a blind eye to it. And
I
it's
must say, I am fascinated by this, Gary.
He's
and
referring to people like Brian Singer. You know,
I don't-
it's being
I'm embarrassed now because I don't. I've
Brian
been here
Singer was
for
one
a
of- it
long
was
time.
the-
I don't know who Brian Singer is.
Brian Singer is a brilliant director, created the X-Men, directed the X-Men, wrote The Usual Suspects, I believe. he was. This is a while where a bunch of them were getting busted. You know, the people that were in charge of the boy bands, just a whole slew. And we don't have exact evidence or data of who every one of them is or who was, but you could assume that birds of a feather do flock together. And a lot of the Hollywood
Bill
parties.
Cosby, though, is a perfect example. He wasn't necessarily a pedophile. I would think he probably was.
I'm sorry, I
But
did not hear the name, Gary.
Bill Cosby. I mean, he was doping and drugging women and raping them, and
But
it
they
was
were
well
they
known.
Yeah, but they were
children?
above age, right? We
Yeah,
let's not. They,
I think
let's-
the woman who was convicted of drugging and raping was
Was
I
it-
think she was a middle-aged woman.
Yeah, she was.
You know.
Or no, she wasn't middle-aged.
Oh
She
no,
was
no, that's what I
middle-aged
mean.
by the time the lawsuit came out. But anyways, but Gary's bigger point, Ben, is this Hollywood thing. When did it turn? Because it used to be run.
And Hollywood in the 30s was very thoroughly left-wing, and lots
Really?
of communists were in very high positions. Lots.
Now,
Not
was
as
this-
studios. I'm sorry,
Now,
Gary.
Was this done though, Ben, through Russian communism kind of
I think
flowing?
they had some connection. Yeah, they had some connection.
That's a great question,
There were
actually.
connections from what was then called the NKVD, but later came to be called the KGB, to various unions in Hollywood, but some of those unions resisted the communists, including the Screen Actors Guild, which was headed at one point by Ronald Reagan. And he fought against the communists in his union very hard and did quite well at keeping them out. Once he was gone, though, the floodgates were open. But even now, I don't think there's a connection in which there's someone calling up from the Kremlin and saying to someone at the Screen Actors Guild, do such and such. It's just they think along the same lines. They have very much the same interests. And they don't need to give instructions. They're all pals, and they know what each other wants. And I think, by the way, I will add, Hollywood is still a wonderful, wonderful place. And in terms of the world, its product makes some incredibly great product. And there are some very, very wonderful people here, and some of them have been amazingly kind to yours truly. But it has always been quite left-wing. It was during the McCarthy era, the Alger Hiss era, the communists were somewhat suppressed. They came bouncing back in a frenzy once the Democrats took over in the era of the Kennedy and Johnson, and they just have gotten stronger and stronger and stronger.
And if you just tuned in, you are listening to the Saturday Night Special of Ben Stein's Rabbit Hole. And I want to remind everybody to please keep downloading those episodes and also subscribe to Ben Stein's email, benstein.substack.com. We're joined tonight by Gary Collins from simplelifenow.com. Not a simple man, but a simple life. And of course, Benjamin Jeremy Stein, the king of the rabbit hole. But I was sort of giggling in my head just because I read a story today, and I don't want to get into it too much. But you brought up LA, and we've just had a string of horrific mayors here, from Villaraigosa to Garcetti, and it's rumored that that Garcetti is going to be the new ambassador to India. And
I think that was in the LA Times this morning. It wasn't a rumor.
And I said, and he's going to resign if he gets appointed. And I was thinking to myself, brilliant, get the guy from the large, the shithole of homelessness here, and make him an ambassador to the. And Ben, we do have a homeless crisis here. That's obvious.
A real crisis.
A real crisis, and get him over to India. And I just thought it was who better? The guy that I just thought it was sort of comical. We don't have to get in. I want to get back to Ben Stein's.
I think Garcetti has accomplished so little. To think that he'll be able to accomplish anything at all.
It's a joke. It's an absolute.
With the size of India is just heartbreaking.
To quote Tropic Thunder, a nutless monkey could have done a better job running the city of LA than Eric Garcetti, who, if people are unaware of him, is a product of nepotism, and we have that a lot in
I
California.
forget
As
what
far
his
as
father did. Was his
his
father
father
mayor
was a
too?
mayor, yeah.
I
His
thought
father,
so.
his father was Gil
His father was
Garcetti.
That's what I was going to say.
His father was Gil Garcetti. People, Jerry Brown, his father too was governor of this state of
And but
California.
interestingly enough, Pat Brown was governor. He was not a bad governor. I mean, he did some very good things. He greatly improved the California university system, and he was by no means a complete failure. And Spaceship Earth, his son, the nutcase, he wasn't a
Moonbeam.
terribly bad Governor Moonbeam. He wasn't a terribly bad
See,
guy either.
okay, so in the rabbit hole, Gary, he brings up an exceptional point. You really do, Ben, because this is something I talk a lot about, Gary, is back in the day, you could be a Republican or you could be a Democrat. If you ran the city or state in a good way, you were voted in. It didn't really matter what letter you necessarily had before you in name. And growing up, Cuomo was the governor. He spoke a good game. He got a majority of all the votes, Gary. And it's no longer the case. It is total tribal from top to bottom. And yeah, Gary, go ahead.
Well, I've always said that we'll never end it until you have a true third party who is more middle of the road, libertarian based, that can actually make some inroads. But it's hard because both systems have it's a monopoly. Any party that tries to rise and come out, they just destroy. I mean, look what they did to Ross Perot. They destroyed that guy, and he could have won, and he backed out. And I truly think that his life was threatened and his family's life was threatened. I truly
Oh, I
believe
know.
that.
I don't know if that's true or not, but I do. I think someone raised on this show a few weeks ago, or maybe it was a couple of months ago. Time flies. Uh, that I wonder if judges are being threatened and their
It's
lives are
Larry
being
Clayman's
threatened.
always been bringing
Oh,
that up.
absolutely.
Okay, all right. Well, then,
Yeah.
all right. Even so, it still might have some merit. I say even so. Larry's a smart, intelligent, well-educated guy, but it does sound far-fetched. But why wouldn't it be true? And why wouldn't it be true that if these people are desperate enough and evil enough, they would approach a justice of the court and say, "We know where you live. We know where your children go to school.
Yep.
We know where your wife shops, or where she goes to school, or where she works. Uh, we It's very, very important to us that such and such a case not go up on appeal." Why wouldn't that happen?
You
Why
see, can
would
I
that not
can I
have
say
happened?
something, Ben? Everything that we thought was far-fetched, no longer do we think is far-fetched
Yeah, that's
anymore.
scary. That's scary.
It's that's how much the parties have changed, is that we've become the party where nothing is far-fetched anymore. And the left has become, the Democrats have believed everything they tell us, believe the intelligence communities, believe all that stuff. And as we're going through this rabbit hole, we could really trace how that shift, that paradigm shift that's happened between the two parties, Ben. When we became skeptics, especially, we could go back to a little pre-Trump, and see, as things were being revealed that he was being spied on and FISA abuse, things in our wildest dreams that we didn't want to believe.
Yeah, very
And
true.
so, but Gary, nothing is, and you've been in the business, you've served the country for over 20 years in different administrations and different jobs. Nothing is far-fetched, Gary.
Oh, I've heard the conversations. I've been there and heard the private conversations. When I was protecting people, so I was standing right next to them when they were in meetings or phone conversations, and I heard some very interesting things. Um, for I don't know how this goes. It's just gotten so strange. I saw the interview, or the uh, speech that Trump gave on Hannity, that interview slash, and usually I don't watch that stuff, but I was interested. I was like, well, I haven't heard from this guy for a while. Let's hear what he has to say. The contrast between Trump and Biden is night and day. As a guy who doesn't like either one, to be honest with you, I'm actually becoming more of a Trump fan as this Biden shipwreck continues to go,
It's
because
so sad. So sad.
it's
So sad.
stunning
Barry.
to watch that. Trump gets up there and, hey, you may not like his persona and how he talks and how he goes about himself, But I'll tell you what, the guy gets shit done. And I hate to say it, but he does. And
And he's
Biden,
smart.
I don't know
He's
what
smart.
he does.
He's
He's,
smart.
he's right. He's cognitively there, and he's very smart. I mean, but Ben, that actually, I want to get to a bigger question now in the rabbit hole of this. Okay, so somewhere along the line in this country, people decided that they like to vote for who looks best in the suit, right? So the constant knock on
I'm
Trump.
not sure that's true.
No, but the constant knock on Trump always was, well, I don't like the way he does the, let me not say a suit, but the way they spoke, that somehow actions, words mattered more than action.
Yeah.
And so I'm sure there was a nobler time where presidents like Teddy Roosevelt or somewhere along the line, Ben, it stopped. People started caring about how it sounded and how we were perceived rather than the actions of the actual office or the person, the good they were doing. I don't know when that happened.
Well, I don't know when it happened either. I have read a wonderful, incredibly, unbelievably good biography of George Washington that says it happened during George Washington's era, and George Washington made sure that he was wearing the best looking suit at any meeting, and also his hair was, in those days they powdered men's hair and men wore wigs and so forth, and so it obviously has always been important, and I think it's important even in the days of Julius Caesar. I think that's always been very, very important. But what I think is kind of interesting in today's era is we have as president of the United States now a person who simply does not have any qualifications for the job. I mean, he was not a particularly distinguished senator. He was certainly not a distinguished law student. His qualifications are just that it was passed on to him by the Democratic power elite. It was given to him as a gift for years of service, and I think because they realized he was someone they could control, so they could control him. I think Hillary Clinton was tougher and stronger. And someone just today said to me, "Who did I think more highly of, Hillary Clinton, or I think Kamala was the other one?" And I said, Hillary Clinton by far. I thought she was an intelligent woman, and I disagreed with her on many, many things. I thought she was an extremely poor public speaker, but basically an intelligent woman. She was a year behind me at Yale, and I don't think anybody thought she got there by her looks. So she got there because she was an intelligent, hardworking woman, and I don't think anyone can say the same about Mr. Biden. He was a party player. And part of the playing was he was a segregationist. Not always, but at the beginning, he was a segregationist. No one has ever brought that up since. Trump never was a segregationist, never at any time was a segregationist. When Trump owned all those residential units in New York and very, very fancy addresses in New York, he was the first one to say, I will take black people in my building. I will take Jews in my building. All the other people wouldn't. He would. He gets no credit for that at all.
I am shocked, Gary, that a conservative or a Republican gets no credit for good deeds. And he brings up a great point about Biden. I mean, he's by all metrics, he's an idiot.
I wouldn't say he's an idiot. He's not.
Well, you
he's
sort
not
of summed him up as.
Idiot. I mean, he's not.
Wait. He graduated at the top of his law school class. Just ask him; he'll tell you.
No, I mean it's not been documented many times.
He's adult.
At the very bottom of it.
How about adult?
I know he said that though. Yeah, he bottom of his class. He had the top third mixed with the bottom.
Yeah, right. He plagiarized the person that said that they were the top of their law of the class. That's what he did. And what's actually, and I've shared this before, was even more amazing. And I don't want to talk ill of this person at all because they're not all there anymore. But this is a true story. It happened to Ben twice, where two people said, and I don't want to talk ill of them. I don't want to say any bad words because they're going through it mentally. But two people
I did not know that. So
yeah, their brain isn't functioning. One of the greatest writers in the world. One of the greatest. I don't want to say one of the greatest. A very good writer in Hollywood. was in a meeting or something with Ben.
I
And
was a producer. Like, can I tell the
yeah,
story? I'll
please.
tell it very fast.
Yeah.
For a part of my time here in Hollywood, I was a producer, and I would think up or bring to the table ideas for movies or TV shows, and then the studio would say, "That's a good idea. Let's hire a writer to get a script written, and then we'll see how we like it in terms of making it." And one time we brought in a very, very successful writer, and I just was making small talk with him about his life. And I said, "Where did you go to school?" And he said, "I went to such and such college, and then I went to Yale Law School." And I said, "Really?" I said, "Did may I ask when you graduated?" And he said, "Yes, 1970." And I said, "Really?" I said, were you happy there at that time?" He said, "Yes." And I did very well. I was valedictorian of my class. And I said, "Well, sir, with the greatest possible respect, that was my class. I was there in that class, and I was valedictorian. And I don't remember, there are only 80 people in the class, and I don't remember seeing you there at all, period." And he then said, this guy had chutzpah like you can't imagine. He said, "Well, what are we doing? Looking for a script writer or playing 20 questions?" And it turned out, I later followed up a little bit on it. He had never even been at Yale Law School at all. He had applied, been turned down, and that was it. The other person was
Detective Ben Stein.
the other person was a studio head, very highly placed guy in Hollywood. And I asked him where he had gone to school. And by an incredible coincidence, he also said Yale Law School. And I said, "Really?" I said, "I know you're a little bit older than I am. When did you graduate?" And he told me what year it was. And he said, he said, "I did very well there. I was valedictorian of my class." Okay, great. I called up the alumni office at Yale. They knew me. I mean, I had been valedictorian. They knew me. And they said, "Never heard of him." That's how it is. But rarely do people get caught doing it.
It's amazing, and it's an amazing coincidence that they brought it up to the person that was actually there at the time.
Yes, yes.
And on that note, if you just tuned in, you are listening to The World According to Ben Stein. It's our Saturday night special.
If you question mine, you can call the alumni office at Yale. They'll have it.
We have no doubt, Ben, you graduated valedictorian.
And by the way, I did not graduate valedictorian by having the highest grades. I was nowhere near having the highest grades.
The biggest schlong.
I was the most well liked, and that was largely because I was a big student radical and took on the teachers and argued with them a lot, not about politics, but mostly just about the whole method of teaching law, the so-called Socratic method.
And on that note, I want to remind everybody again, please download the episodes. Also, Gary Show, simplelifenow.com, and also read Ben's stuff at spectator.org. It's really great stuff. He's been writing for them for years.
Decades.
And please, if you could afford to throw a few dollars the American Spectator way, spectator.org, that would be greatly appreciated. But we are going down the rabbit hole of Ben Stein's brain. And I realized like that today, it's sort of a fascinating, it's one of the fascinating things about the show. And it's fascinating, Gary, about that we get to talk to Ben, because we never know what the next subject could lead us to. And it's like, who knew that we would get to the writer lying about, going to Yale Law School with Ben. And I just think it's sort of a fascinating thing. But again, I want to talk about revisionist history because or with Trump, because as often noted, Ben, this guy was huge with the rappers. The rappers loved him. They put him in music videos. He was beloved by everybody. He was the biggest lover of the Black community in the world until
they loved him.
And they loved him until he became a Republican, and all of a sudden he became the biggest. Of course, every Republican president's Hitler, and every Republican is a racist. That's just who they are. It's a given, Ben, and it's frightening that we actually have clips of his career. Like, this isn't like we're talking about somebody from 50 years ago that we don't have pictures of Ben. We have him in music videos. We have a bunch of African American or Black or whatever you want to call it, athletes or people that this guy has helped out, just given jobs to, and at the same time still call this person a race. I mean, it's a fascinating thing. We have video.
No,
He
not
was-
only a racist, one of the biggest racists ever. That's what blows me away.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's astonishing. And by the way, in modern life, there's almost no real racism. I mean, that was a phenomenon that was very much a real thing when I was a child. Tell me again, you're 51, Gary. You said you're on the I'm just over 50, so let's say you're 51. So okay, so I'm 76. I'm 20, very just about exactly
century.
25 years older than you. When I was a child, there was real serious racism. I mean, where the neighborhoods were restricted against Jews, very much so against blacks. Schools very much restricted against Jews. That's all gone now, except there is real racism against Asians at some of the universities. But somehow, the less it is a fact of real life, the bigger it becomes as a political talking point. And why is that? Because there isn't that much else to complain about. I mean, what else is there for people to complain about? If you want to complain about the terrible condition of the black family, more power to you. The black family is in real trouble. There's no doubt about that. But that's not owing to anything the Republicans did. That's owing to the incredible irresponsibility of so many black fathers. That's not a political matter.
Okay, so I want to ask you a question now. Okay, so when we look back in history, the fight you fought against the Vietnam War was an absolute just fight. Even your father-in-law said the same thing. He agreed with,
and he was a big Vietnam War hero.
Big Vietnam War hero that believed that you guys were just in fighting the war. It was a correct complaint. When did complaining about the most absurd crap get into our vernacular?
That is a really good question, but I think it has to do with the fact that they just can't think of other things to complain about, so they make this up. And especially because the number one problem in America today, by far, is the poor community. The poor condition of the African American community and the African American family. Okay, as I say, you cannot. It's not allowed to blame it on the black man who knocks up his woman and then abandons her. That would be the correct, ethically correct blame situation. You're not allowed to do that. So you have to find somebody else to blame. Let's blame Donald Trump. Let's blame a rich white man. Can't lose.
So Gary, I have a question for you. So you admittedly come from poor white trash.
Wait, I don't. Admittedly, that I'm not sure I believe it. Frankly, to me, he has a kind of aristocratic look.
But Gary, and he comes from a dirt poor town, and how did you, Gary Collins, because I think it's a very important message. How did you come to not be a complainer, and to realize there was a way out, and you chose that way out, when many people I'm sure you grew up with did not?
Not really. I mean, everyone has their, I say you always fight for your own lot in life, and some just decide not to fight for it. But for me, it was just kind of realizing and seeing the things around me, and it wasn't bad. I mean, we were in a small town, and a lot of us were poor, but when a lot of you are poor, you don't know you're poor because you still had food on the table, you still had a roof over your head, you went to a public school, totally fine, nothing wrong with that. And a lot of us actually came out, and I had two guys, friends of mine ahead of me. One went to the Air Force Academy, two went to the Naval Academy. One who went to the Air Force Academy is a 2-star in the Air Force now. So we had some successful people break out. Some people went to Ivy League schools. I couldn't afford any of that. I had to go and go to poor state school and pay my way through. But I think it was different times too, because the public education I had, it wasn't the best, but it wasn't bad. It gave you all the tools you needed to be successful in life.
Brilliant. Same. I went to a public school too. It's interesting. My best friend went to a very fancy, very, very fancy private day school, St. Albans, very, very fancy school. And he got a very good education, But and he went on to be an extremely good student at Princeton, a school which had been founded by his ancestors hundreds of years ago. And yet, we at Montgomery Blair High School had been taught enough so we could catch up with them and even to some extent overtake them. Yes, the public schools in those days were far better. I mean, when I think that at my high school, which was free, of course, uh, we were taught Latin. We had excellent courses in Latin, fabulous courses in Latin, and we emerged knowing a great deal of American and European history. And nowadays, people know nothing.
Okay. So let me rephrase, go back to that question. Gary Collins, 20 years now, is 17 in that same school. Does he walk out with the same results?
I don't think so. But because one big thing about when I went through school too is I could not tell you the political affiliation of any of my teachers. I had no idea.
That's a very good point. That is a very good point. I totally agree, except I can tell you, I told this story many times on the show. I had one teacher whom I mockingly, jokingly said, that sounds like a kind of a question a communist would ask. And it turned out she was a communist and had lost her last job at her last teaching post because she was a communist. And she got very mad at me, and she took revenge on me as best she could. And my mother, a very, very serious anti-communist, took revenge on her as best she could. And so that was, but as I say, I still don't know. It's been a long time. I don't know whether our teachers were Republicans or Democrats. In those days, I was living in a border state. It was, I think they were probably all Democrats. But I think they were all segregationist Democrats.
So getting back to both of you, Ben, you had obviously a family unit that was extremely strong. Gary, was yours strong, or was it?
It wasn't the best, but you know what? We had a good community.
And it wasn't it wasn't.
Yeah.
But getting back to it, it wasn't it became somehow between 50, Gary being 50, me being 45, and the kids of today, where Ben and Gary, where the parents look to the schools to do their parenting. And I don't know when exactly that happened, but that's what's
here's a very big difference. And I've talked about this with friends who I grew up with. The difference was when I was growing up, if you got out of line and you're acting like a jackass, it was expected some other parent would come up to you and tell you to knock that shit off. And if you didn't, there was going to be repercussions. I was spanked by other parents if I misbehaved over at their house.
Oh my God, it's so funny you say that. This is a true story. I went to private school, but I don't want to share the sadness of this story, but I didn't go to school one day, and I was sitting on the front stoop of my house, and within 15 minutes, a woman, the next door neighbor, was at the stoop and made sure that I got that I wasn't, like, my mother had gotten within 15 minutes, there was no secret that I was cutting school that day. I mean, I was busted. And
but see, I can tell you a similar story. I grew up next to Carl Bernstein. Carl, despite the fact that he and I are very, very, very much on different political tracks, he became an extremely famous journalist, extremely famous. But when Carl was sick at school and had to be sent home from school because he was unwell, his mother worked. His mother was one of the few housewives on the street who worked. He came, and my mother took care of him at our house. And that's the kind of neighborhood it was. I live in a very, very fancy part of Beverly Hills now. I say very, very fancy because I won't be able to live there much longer, I suspect. But that would never happen. We don't even know the names of our neighbors. That would never happen now.
It's really, it's Gary. It's really I feel bad. I feel bad for these kids, because even though that was annoying that she came in, I don't want to say her name, but she was a really nice lady and ratted me out to my mother. Those are important things to have in neighborhoods. We're missing that. I mean, We look at
We're
neighborhoods like
missing neighborhoods. We're missing neighborhoods.
we're missing neighborhoods, and we look at the neighborhoods now that are especially in the urban areas, and it's frightening and it's shocking, and it's very scary. And I think we should all consider ourselves blessed that we were in this country at the right place at the right time with the right teachers, even though we might have had some awkward or mean ones or whatever it was. I'll take what we had compared to what we have, and what's going on now in a heartbeat.
We had great times.
Yeah,
I'm
Gary.
still friends with teachers I had to this day.
And so is Ben. Ben's friends with people that he was friends with 50 years ago. And I still am in contact with, but I'm still in contact, not with Mrs. Levin, of course. I'm your Mrs. Levin. You're my Mrs. Levin, my English teacher from hell. But she was a nice lady and she had a really nice daughter. And we're running out of time. I just wanted to get to one thing really quickly. I want from each of you, the one family member that you always were, that you loved and they have fond memory of. Because there's always that one cool family member that you were closer to and that you have a really fond memory outside of your immediate family, Ben.
Nobody in my family even remotely came as close to me as my father.
No. But I mean, like the cool uncle, there was nobody.
I loved very, very much my cousin Jeffrey. He was a couple of years older than I was. He took his own life several years ago because he was depressed over his economic situation, and he breaks my heart. I loved him a lot.
Yeah, and you've shared great stories about him. I mean, he had amazing stories of success.
I loved him a lot.
Yeah, God rest his soul. What about you, Gary? And thank you for sharing that, Ben, because it's important sometimes that we remember out loud those people.
Yeah, my grandfather helped keep me in line, played catch with me all the time. Baseball hit fly balls to me out in the backyard when my dad didn't, and also he was a World War II veteran, did 35 years in the LA Fire Department and retired as a chief. Was a very good man, always treated me with respect, but also kept my ass in line and loved him till the day he died.
That's brilliantly said, both of you.
How about you, Judah?
Mine is my Aunt Jane and Uncle Herbie. They were, I brought up Herbie last week, but it was both of them. He had a tandem bicycle, Uncle Herbie. And when I would go to visit him in Long Island, him and I would be on the tandem bicycle. And I just thought, what could be better than being on this tandem bicycle with my Uncle Herbie at this moment? I just thought I was the cool, it took away all the problems I had going on. And I was just alone with Uncle Herbie on that tandem bicycle. And we have to thank those special people that were there in those times in our lives. I want to thank everybody that's been listening to the show tonight. I had so much fun doing this show tonight. Ben Stein's Rabbit Hole, because you never know where it's going to lead to next. You've been to so many places. You've lived through so much of history. You are, like I said, the Forrest Gump, the genius Gump. And I want to remind everybody to please keep downloading our episodes. You can find Gary at thesimplelifenow.com. Ben Stein's email, benstein.substack.com. But get Gary's podcast, please. I beg of you. They're really good. Of course, benspectator.org and his daily diaries, and also Newsmax. And I want to thank everybody that's joined us this Saturday night. Ben, take us out.
Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. Turn me around, turn me around. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. Keep on a walking, keep on a talking, keep on a singing that song. Ain't gonna let no first strike policy turn me around, turn me around, turn me around. Ain't gonna let no first strike policy turn me around. Keep on a walking, keep on a talking. Gonna build a brand new world.
And on that note,